4.5 billion shoppers. One unstoppable region. That's APAC in 2025. 60% of the planet's population, 18 megacities, and the fastest growing middle class on Earth. From Jakarta's super apps to Seoul's autonomous stores, the next decade of retail will be reading in the Asia-Pacific region first. And that's why next week, OFFBounds will be back to Singapore for APAC's biggest retail event, and we will join 300 exhibitors, 10,000 attendees from more than 50 different countries to find out about the opportunities and innovation leading this diverse region to success. In this episode, we'll talk about NRF APAC's second edition and the economics that make this region so special. And for that, I invited Quail, who is the managing director of Comexposium, and is the mind behind the organization of the event, and David Mann, the Asia chief economist at Mastercard Economics Institute, who will help us understand the current economic scenario. Here's Paula Macaggi, and this is episode 71 of my show. Welcome to OFFBounds. If you follow OFFBounds for a while, you'll know that last year we went to Singapore to cover the first edition of NRF APAC. And in case you haven't seen the learnings from last year, I invite you to check out episode 27. That was definitely one of our most popular ones from last year. And that proves that our audience, which is mostly Western, is very curious about the region and the opportunities that lie there. That's why we are going back. Next week, I'll be in the City of Lights to join thousands of people from all over the east side of the world to find out about the latest innovations, the market adaptations to macroeconomic shifts, and what are the different strategies that we can learn and eventually implement here in the West. As most of you know, NRF's Big Show is one of the most important retail events in the world, and it happens annually in New York every January. And in 2025, we attended the 114th edition of it. From last year, though, they started to expand internationally, with NRF APAC's first edition in Singapore, and this year they are hosting the second one in Asia and the first one in Europe, NRF Paris, happening in September. That means that the more they grow overseas, the more valuable is our partnership with them, as being global is one of OFFBounds' core value propositions. Last year at Marina Bay Sands, we saw the diversity of the crowd attending the event. APAC is diverse, and the only way to thrive there is through partnerships. You can't enter a new market without the right partner, and that is the amazing value that NRF brings to the region. It is the place to be so businesses can grow and expand. And I talk about that with Quail, the managing director of the event, who carries this mission on his heart.
Yeah, the markets are diverse. You don't have to look to Malaysia. You can see 3 different ethnic groups, multiple languages, multiple religions, multiple ways. And then you look within demographics, multiple ways to pay, different legislative contexts. It's incredibly different. So on one hand, we are the largest retail marketplace in the world. We have an incredible amount of wealth being generated. So 3.49 billion people will join the middle class from 2020 to 2030. So the change in consumers' consumption, pace, volume, whether it's food, fashion, or any other industry, is incredible. So, but the challenges are really, it's about that cross-border piece. People in Australia, Singapore look up at, Europe and say, well, one currency, one legislative set of rules to play by. We don't have none of that here. You cannot expand around the region without, finding a like-minded partner in the market you intend to enter. For us, it gives us a real reason for being. You've got to find these partners. You've got to find these spiritually aligned people that will work with you. And I think for us, there's an incredible amount of energy and excitement, but to really harness it, you've got to find the people, and that's what we aim to be, to place a meeting point for the people to meet.
And Riff is right. APAC is the largest retail marketplace in the world and the region that continues to drive world growth. It's also where almost 60% of the world population lives. And I invited David Mann, who is the Asia's chief economist of Mastercard Economics Institute, to help us understand more about it.
We are still in a world where the Asia-Pacific region is leading global growth in terms of it being the place with the fastest growing markets of the major economies around the world. I'm thinking in particular of India, even China, that's growing at a relatively slower pace than it has been used to in the past few decades, even there, it's still likely to grow, in our view, around 4.5% this year, which is significantly faster than other advanced economies around the world, and other major markets. India is the other fast market, of course, but even the ASEAN region itself has an exciting story, and that has not really changed.
David Mann was responsible for one of my favorite presentations of the event last year, and I can't wait to watch him again next week, especially because even though APAC will continue to be the growth engine of the world, a lot has changed since 2024. And that has to do with the political and economical challenges that have recently emerged with US new government.
If we go back to last year, we were actually talking about ending the post-bungee jump economy period that had been in place since the pandemic. And I should explain that first before then talking about tariffs. What was the bungee jump story? It was this collapse of growth in 2020, the aggressive rebound as we went from being closed to open because of the COVID pandemic, and then restoring activity after all of the precautionary measures eased off. But then what we had was this spike and sharp volatility in major economic variables like inflation, interest rates, wages, migration trends, saving trends. Everything was swung around really wildly. And that extreme move that we had been going through was finally in really settling down last year. And we thought that 2025 was the year of calmer growth, of settling in to a more steady growth environment where we just go into cruise control speed, lower interest rates, inflation back under control again. And we're in this world where there's no recession and also no boom either, just more steady state growth. Then along comes the beginning of 2025. And the big swing that we had was actually this extra shock to the system, which came from seeing this major amounts of tariffs being announced by the US on literally everybody. And as a result, there's been some financial markets volatility. The interesting thing, though, and I will be bringing this out at the event as well, is that the real story here is, yes, there is a challenge for global trade, of course, with the largest economy in the world now tariffing all imports of goods at varying degrees, the most aggressive, of course, being to China. But on top of that, we're also in a world where actually we could end up seeing even lower interest rates, even lower inflation around everywhere else, and higher inflation in the US, and a more confused policy outlook for the Federal Reserve in the US because of having slower growth and rising prices at the same time. For everybody else, we've already seen from the shipments data from China that there is this increase in China's overall global shipments, less to the US, but more everywhere else in the world. And we think that will just gain traction over the next couple of months as inventories in China get run down to try and get more defensive because of the trade tensions. So actually, you could have dramatically lower prices in many markets on top of the, not just being these goods from China, but also, let's not forget, oil prices are down 15 to 20%, depending on which day of the week we're talking about, comparing to the 2nd of April Liberation Day announcements and where we are now. That drop in oil prices, if sustained, is also very good news for a lot of consumers and for businesses elsewhere in the world. So while there is this concern about the tariff issue, there's actually some constructive stories that we could be talking about when we think about the resilience of China's growth, because it has already also implemented major fiscal stimulus to counter the drag on growth that it knew was coming from the tariffs that it was fully expecting.
The scenario for the APAC economy looks quite interesting, and the content of the event reflects that. With an advisory board of more than 30 leaders from all across the region, the agenda was well curated and reflects 13 strategic topics relevant to all countries. From data and AI, cross-border marketplaces to consumer behavior, the agenda is very exciting.
So the shape of the content will be different within the conference. So we really have our 11 leadership keynote sessions, which are much more representative of the entire Asia-Pacific region, from the Philippines, from India, from Japan, from Australia, from Singapore, from Indonesia. But then we've focused our breakouts, of which there are about 18, on much more applied learnings. And we've looked to pair markets on topics. So we've got Australia and Southeast Asia on ESG. We've got Thailand and the Philippines on health and well-being of retail employees. We've got, good example, we've got Fair Price in Singapore and Mecca beauty brands. talking about the next great retail experience. So Mecca in Australia, for example, is launching the largest beauty retail experience in the world in Melbourne this month. And FairPrice have built arguably the store of the future that is beyond. So they're both doing incredible things, but what's unlocking what's the insights that drive that? So that's really cool.
And I can't wait. If you won't be around, don't worry. We will be covering everything and reporting directly on our LinkedIn and Instagram pages. So don't forget to follow us there. And for this year, I'm happy to say that I'll be joining the lineup of speakers to moderate a session on employee welfare and how that reflects in the customer experience. I'll be joined by Panchali Ratamawat, who is the Chief People Officer at the Central Retail Group, the largest retailer in Thailand, and Mia Anderson, the GM of Sales and Operations at 2 Degrees. And I'm happy to say that this will be an episode on OFFBounds, our first one that will be recorded live. One of the things I am particularly interested in understanding is what it means to be a happy employee in each of these cultures, and what are the programs that allow that. Stay tuned. The breakout sessions this year will include talks on specific countries. They're called Country Spotlights and will cover Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia. And with the power of insights from my guest today, David Mann, who will walk through the economics of these countries, as well as one of my favorite analysts, Simon Kemp, who leads Digital Reporter and tracks what consumers do online. But why these countries?
Yeah, so maybe let's start with Indonesia. It's one of the really interesting stories. I was just recently at one of our big events that we were holding there. And I think the interesting part of the story is that there is this, I think, very positive story long-term still to be told in Indonesia and definitely in the Philippines of the rising middle class, the very resilient growth rates that we can see there, even if we were to have slower global growth. Indonesia in particular has proven over multiple cycles that it is actually quite resilient to global growth being softer. So it's not a small, relatively open to trade economy. It's the other way around, where it's relatively large, and yes, trade matters, but its sensitivity to demand coming from the US or indeed from China is not that huge. Not, for example, compared to, say, Vietnam. So as a domestic market with a growing middle class, which in our view is really shown best by the really strong growth in domestic travel that has gone up exponentially over the last 6-7 years, that to us, alongside the preference for eating and for travel and for experiences, really is a great demonstration within the ASEAN region, given Indonesia is the biggest one of all of the economies there, that is the really strong story. That is, I think, the bedrock of where the resilience of pretty strong growth in the ASEAN region comes from. It's a higher growth market, for example, than Singapore or indeed than Thailand. Now, the other interesting part is that both Indonesia and the Philippines over the last few years at various points have needed to raise interest rates because of FX pressures. And actually, if we move into a world where we have less of a growth outperformance in the US, and instead we end up with dollar weakness over the next few years rather than dollar strength, then that pressure comes off and there's more room for even lower interest rates in those markets, which would also be quite helpful. What we're waiting for in Indonesia next will be with the new government on implementing a lot of new plans to try and find ways of spreading out the benefits of growth throughout the population. And also it is, don't forget, it's such a broadly spread out archipelago country that infrastructure investment is still really high up on people's priority list there. So those are the main things I would stress for Indonesia. On the Philippines front, there is also this resilience of growth. There is also the fact that we know that over the years, the Philippines had done a very good job of building a good services industry in the BPO industry in particular, so business process outsourcing. And that has been a very successful story for multiple years. What it does also mean is that there is at least alternatives to purely manufacturing when it comes to where some of the externally driven growth can actually come from. And a little bit like Indonesia, it does have that resilience to what global growth is actually doing. The other big benefit that Philippines has is a large amount of remittance flows that comes in from multiple places around the world. North America is a big source, the rest of Asia is a big source, and the Middle East is a big source. So those flows coming in are great for foreign earnings, as well as for supplementing incomes for people and families in the Philippines to be able to keep the growth going domestically too. And that's something that we think is a good short-term as well as long-term story. It also has a good-sized market, a large number on the population as well. Not as much as Indonesia, but still a very significant amount of people, where also we are seeing that sort of evidence of a rising middle class. Thailand is a slightly different story. It's further along on the income per person route. It does have, of course, a very big and growing tourism sector, which both the Philippines and Indonesia are also looking to grow. But Thailand is really a leader in the ASEAN region on its tourism flows. It still is in the recovery mode on that front. And that's where some of, I think, the positivity can come in on expectations for growth in Thailand, that there is a strong attractiveness of tourism that is continuing to bring in many flows. There's lots of different countries of origin that are coming in these days, even compared to the pre-pandemic era. The big challenge that is being faced is to try and get even more back of the tourists that used to come in from mainland China. We know that the outbound international tourists from China are not 100% recovered, but we're on the way to that recovery perhaps this year. And the other challenge, though, is also that with China's economy still softer than it had been over the last several decades, consumers are also not spending as much as they used to. We see it with the evidence from spending per capita data from Hong Kong, for example. That's also the other challenge that Thailand had, because so much of the tourism inflows and spending had come from China. The one positive, though, and this is something that actually Vietnam benefited a lot from, is even more growth of outbound tourists coming from India. And that route, that corridor, India into ASEAN, is something that we're very focused on as an increased amount of linkages are popping up, in particular of the growth of the demand for middle and upper middle class consumers in India wanting to travel more internationally. You see it a lot with, say, weddings being held, Indian weddings held in, say, Phuket, very common affair during the key times of the year. We think there's plenty more of that type of flow of international tourists that can come, to the point where actually, and this is one final thing I would mention on the international travel front, that we think by 2040, the total amounts of outbound international travelers coming from India will match where we were in 2019 from China. And that is already something that even today we've not yet broken even on from China, but we think we will do at some point this year.
APAC is an exciting region with lots to learn about, and even though it's a show to connect all those countries, everyone is welcome. Last year, there were lots of visitors from different parts of the world and even Brazil. And this year, they're expected to have even more.
I think for me, if you're coming to Singapore to visit NRF Retail Special Asia Pacific, I think you've got to not give yourself some time to experience Singapore. It is a little country with a lot to offer. So you'll see we're in an amazing venue in the Marina Bay Sands, and you'll have an amazing experience at the show, and you'll meet lots of people, and you'll have your contact group will expand amazingly. But get involved with the tours, the retail tours. Get involved and eat some of the food, see some of the sights. There's lots to do in and around the show. So enjoy your week here, because you won't have a bad time. It's an amazing country to have a show like this. So if you're coming to Singapore, you make sure you squeeze every drop out of your visit, because you've got so much to do and see.
And Raf is 100% correct. Singapore offers incredible examples of good retail. And that starts with the airport and the jewel, which is the best welcome for anyone, and especially for us who work in retail. I also recommend visiting a fair price finance store where you can have a Singapore sling while doing your grocery, and don't miss Don Don Donki, the best chaotic fun that you could have.
Well, I think the story with the NRF is one that's very well known in North America, because it's been such a long-running conference with huge volumes of people coming in from so many different walks of life and different types of retail focus. And that type of thing is what we are seeing replicated in the case of the NRF in Singapore. So many different markets represented, so many people looking to learn about other markets they haven't yet explored. knowing that also the Asia Pacific region is accounting for the biggest delta on retail spending also, not just on GDP. And the challenge, though, is really understanding there are so many different stories in the Asia Pacific. There's no one-size-fits-all story, but you can get a lot of those stories by going there and really seeing so many of the key players from the whole region all coming to the one place to get together, to network, and to be able to share their experiences and their stories from their own markets.
If you couldn't join us this year, make sure you add that to your calendar of events for 2026. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn so you don't miss out what is happening at NRF APAC. I will be personally reporting from there, and I will bring several interviews home. See you next Tuesday.